successful volunteer events, tips for your next day of service. Many organizations host these days, so this is going to be a vibrant conversation. And I get the joy of working here at Get Connected in doing creative communications and outreach. So I get to pull together fun events like this. If you're not familiar with us, Get Connected is our best-in-class volunteer management software, and we serve thousands of organizations across North America. And our software is designed specifically to meet the needs of volunteer managers and their programs. And today we've got a special panel featuring Elizabeth Donovan, who's the head of our Get Connected network team. Elizabeth brings her experience working with nonprofits as well as state organizations to implement tools that support sustainable programming. And Elizabeth is responsible for connecting communities through technology and relationships. And we're so excited to have our guest panelist today, Amanda Trocchi, that's Executive Director of Pittsburgh Cares. Pittsburgh Cares is an organization that's focused on making volunteering easy, accessible, and fun, while ensuring that nonprofits in the community are getting the volunteers they truly need. Pittsburgh Cares serves the greater Pittsburgh metro area and holds the mission of inspiring, equipping, and mobilizing people to take action and affect positive change in their communities. They have just the coolest story of how they got started. So by effectively engaging a wide variety of volunteer populations, Pittsburgh Cares works to strengthen the impact of regional nonprofit partners. And one way Amanda and Pittsburgh Cares does this is through supporting nonprofit partners with unique days of service support. So we're very excited to have her on with us today. And we also have AK Diefenbach. AK is one of our regional managers for the Get Connected network team. And AK is going to be managing the chat box where you can ask questions, share ideas. AK comes from a background of executive leadership experience at an affordable housing nonprofit. And we'll all just work together in that chat box to keep it just so healthy, respectful of a space. And we've got people who are just all across the range as far as volunteer management experience, maybe some folks who've been doing it a long time and some folks who are brand new to the profession. So we're just going to make it just a really amazing community experience. All right. With that, I'm going to go ahead and try and do that whole sharing screen piece of this puzzle. All right. Can everyone see?
Looks good, Court.
Perfect. All right, here we go. Planning successful volunteer events, tips for your next day of service. So what we're going to cover today is what creates a winning day of service for volunteer programs and volunteers. So we want to see that win-win, and the benefits and challenges of hosting a day of service. I think we're all familiar with some of those things. Plus, we'll talk about some practical tips and resources for planning and supervising those days of service volunteers. And so I hope you stay to the end for some of those tips. We're going to talk about creating a positive volunteer experience before, during, and after events. And we're going to talk about partnerships that support days of service at your organization, as well as tools and processes that make managing volunteer events easier. So that's definitely a goal of ours. So Elizabeth, I'll go ahead and pass it over to you.
Sure. So kind of where we want to start ourselves today, what is a day of service or volunteer event? So we kind of start with that broad definition. Typically, a day of service or volunteer event is a special event focused on a specific project where a large group of volunteers are coming together. And some volunteer programs are hosting a day of service regularly. Some may host a small number of events. Maybe you only have one big event. These types of events often host volunteers who are first-time volunteers with your organization. They only come a few times annually, or they're volunteers who are going to come in as a group. So often volunteer programs are going to bring in community groups to work on a big project, larger project. It's a school group, it's a corporate group. So that's kind of our framework for how we're approaching this service event. So we'll start there.
Yeah, and I want to kind of pass it over to Amanda too, just to share maybe a little bit about the background of Pittsburgh Cares and how you all got started, and then how you sort of, got to this place of really working in days of service specifically, and what your aim typically is when you're working to facilitate these days.
Yeah, absolutely. So Pittsburgh Cares was started as just very grassroots organization to make volunteering easier for individuals to get involved. We were founded in 1993, so we're celebrating our 30th birthday this year, but we're actually one of the original organizations associated with Points of Light, which is a nonprofit network that's now global that of organizations that all want to make volunteering easier for their respective cities. And so we were, I know we talked about this before, we were very analog in the olden days before the height of the internet. We would just call nonprofit organizations, see what volunteer opportunities they have available, and then we would put those into a paper calendar and mail them out to people. So we still kind of do that. Thanks to Get Connected, we put all of those opportunities onto our online calendar, where we have a whole bunch of different nonprofit projects that are available, and events as well, that people can sign up for and get involved. But yeah, over the years, we have turned into kind of our region's only organization dedicated to just volunteerism and making that more accessible for people. And so as far as days of service go, we kind of morphed into an organization that makes volunteering easier for employee groups and school groups and things like that. And so we do offer that as kind of a special events planning service to help nonprofits, particularly in our region, with coordinating larger days of service, just because you know, a lot of the time we find that not all nonprofits are equipped to handle large groups of people. It's kind of an uncommon thing for them to have, you know, anywhere from 20 to 100 people on site for a day of service. So we're there to kind of help that process along, but also it's sometimes there's no dedicated volunteer coordinator for that role either, or those days of service. And so that's falling on someone in development or marketing or something like that. And so we work alongside those individuals at the nonprofits to make that planning process as easy as possible. And on the other side, we also work with corporate groups to help their teams plan those days of service, just to make sure everything runs super smoothly.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing. I just really love the story of Pittsburgh Cares, and I could, you know, listen to stories like that every day. So it's really
Yeah,
exciting to
absolutely.
see.
And that's always my thought behind Pittsburgh Cares too, is we might not be you know, the original group of people that started, but I definitely still think of us as a group of friends who want to be friends with our community. And we want to be those people that you come to when you want to get involved and find something to do.
I love it.
I was in a meeting the other day and they called it community organizers, which we've heard before, but like that just stuck in my head because it's like, it's not a connector, it's not an engager, it's an organizer. Like, how do you become that powerful? I can find the threads no one else can see and make something of it. Like, I love those perspectives are cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think my guess is a lot of time and commitment is my guess, how you start doing that and just really caring about your community and just keep showing up every week. That would be where I would start. But as far as pulling together an organization that keeps going for 30 years, I mean, that's amazing. So congrats on that anniversary. Let's talk about, you know, maybe some of the challenges. Why don't you all hop in the chat and start sharing with us perhaps some of the challenges that you've faced in seeking to host a day of service or a larger volunteer event. That way we can take some time to really address those, because again, like Amanda was just saying, like when you get between 20 and 100 people, when maybe perhaps your organization, I mean, some of the places that I've spent time, we only have like 4 to 5 people on a shift. So a day where we might have 20 to 50 people show up, it's much different. And so there is extra preparation that needs to go through. So if you want to like kind of take away with some of these challenges, common challenges that we see, AK, feel free to share with us from the chat what folks are sharing, if there's additional things from the list. But Elizabeth and Amanda, I'll let y'all kind of speak to some of these that we've got here.
The first one always strikes me. It's just, I think that's the weight that falls on that nonprofit. It's what all of you probably are like, okay, what do I need done? But then do you need it done tomorrow? Do you need it done the next week again? I think we were talking earlier this week about when I have a friend that manages an assisted living kind of respite care nonprofit. And she was like, I love these projects because I love to bring in groups, but there's only so many times they can weed our garden. Like it's done. So like, what do I do with 10 people again? And so a big part of the challenge she faced was, how do I find things that are helping us versus just really disrupting the normal day of that nonprofit and the mission they have to achieve every single day. And I think that's probably, I think, Amanda, you talked a little bit about that too, like how you find the best fit, even because, there's
Yeah.
the fun projects and then there's the not so fun projects. And then every group that comes through, of course, wants that perfect experience, but you've got to coordinate it all. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when we were talking earlier this week, we definitely talked a lot about communication and how communicating even the most seemingly menial task that's not necessarily tied to your organization's mission, how do you communicate that to a group of volunteers and show them how it ties into the bigger picture of things? Because I know we've been on sites where they really need even like litter pickups or something like that. I feel like that's a tough sell sometimes. And when you find the right way to communicate something like that, it makes it all the more different as far as the volunteer experience goes. We find that sometimes people get so caught up in the planning of the day or just getting everybody started when we start a volunteer day, that we don't take the time to really go through and talk about like, this is what you're doing today, but this is why it matters. And I think that's a huge part of where we've found people to be more invested and getting just a totally different quality of work from people if you start the day off with a conversation about what your organization does and how even litter pickup contributes to a day of or the mission of the organization. So it could even be just as simple as our clients really appreciate when they come through that there's no litter on the ground, and it creates a more welcoming space that puts them more at ease, that makes them more open to receiving, maybe it's like a therapy nonprofit or something like that. You're just setting the scene for a better client experience for that nonprofit or whatever your organization might be. I think that's a huge part of, planning a service day, essentially, and finding those projects that if you find projects that are on your to-do list that maybe aren't the easiest sell for people to do, that's one way that we kind of work around that for sure.
And in that communication, we talked a little bit about, I guess 3 and 4 maybe kind of oriented this way, where it's that idea of like, how do you make sure you cover the logistics and the on-site so that day of when you show up, we've all had that experience where you show up and you're supposed to be, mulching, but the mulch pile isn't there yet, or it was dropped off in the wrong side of the building. So how are we going to get the mulch through the wheelbarrow over to the beds that we're actually supposed to be doing that day of? So that moment of like site supervision, I know that was one thing I loved. It finally hit our software where it was like, I know that Amanda's in charge of Pittsburgh Cares, but if Amanda's not going to be on site that day, how do I make sure that in the need description and in the reminders, the site supervisor who I need to get a hold of with a cell phone when I can't figure out how to get in the locked building is there so that I can get to them? And I think that piece of the best ones I've had, where just personal experience with companies, have been where we sent someone ahead of time and they just got oriented to the space, the parking, the tools, where everything was. Then they met that person face to face so that they had that, I'm confident Amanda will be there and I've got her cell phone and we're fine. Here we go, 20 people off into the wilderness. But you've got this like security that it's well planned and we're ready. And I think that confidence, so that it's not the person in charge for the company or the group or the teacher feeling just, let's hope it's all okay. Like that moment of nervousness can be just gone out of the factor if you've done that one step pre-planned, pre-visit, pre-phone call, even to just talk through the logistics.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with that. Yeah. And especially if there's not a dedicated coordinator, find the person that is that person with the group for sure. And even consider deputizing them for the day if you have a really large group of people. That's something we definitely take advantage of if it's like a group of 50 people going to a nonprofit. how can we break that day up into smaller tasks and then give each one of those tasks kind of a mini leader that has no problem with bossing around their respective group. I think that's a part of something that I've run into too with our nonprofit partners is they're so receptive to having volunteers and really want them to have a great experience that sometimes they need someone else to tell them, hey, this isn't the right way to do this. Like, if you could slow down on this painting job and worry, like not drip all over the floor, that would be great.
Yeah.
Sometimes I think volunteer coordinators are just so kind and lovely, and it's hard to be a little more firm with volunteers and quality control.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a huge piece of that on-site supervision. AK, are there any challenges that you'd like to pitch over to the group?
Yeah, sure. I mean, our chat is going. It's great. And so I want to take this time to, this is what the chat is for. We're here to drop in your concerns, but also feel free, if you see someone and you have an idea, feel free to drop that in the chat. This is meant to be kind of a second conversation as well. So don't hesitate there. We're all in there chiming in. But yeah, we're seeing some themes in here about just there's a lot of work that goes into recruiting those volunteers, but then ensuring that they're going to show up. I think that's a huge piece here, as well as, yeah, I think touching on what you guys mentioned, that quality of that experience and everything that goes into making sure that that event is worth showing up for. And then that is all communicated back through that volunteer experience. I've also seen some notes about the weather, how weather can, the undesirable factors kind of playing a day in your event, and what you can do to kind of prevent that as well as just some of those plannings around emergencies or liability. And there's a conversation going in the chat about how maybe that has changed within the post-pandemic time, what you're taking on as a volunteer experience, and within that terms of liability and insurance.
I like that question Nancy just posed, the project ideas. Amanda, you talked about before, you always have like a rain plan for if it does rain. What are some of those things that you use as your go-to backups?
Yeah, sure. Rain is always something that we have to think about, especially being in Pittsburgh. It's one of the rainiest places, I think, in the United States. But we always kind of have a pretty long conversation initially with a nonprofit group that we're working with to see what is anything that might be on their possible wish list, to-do list, something that they just couldn't get around to doing, that might be able to be done. And I always say, like, nothing is off the table as far as what a volunteer group can do with the right amount of direction and planning. And so honestly, as far as rain plans go, we're more of a policy of let's try to make this rain or shine. If it can be done in ponchos, we try to make it happen, because if we waited for sunny days always, half of our work would never get done. But as far as like actual rain, thunderstorms, that kind of stuff, we always try to keep in mind either a backup day and communicate that with the group, especially with like corporate groups, things like that. If they're taking a day off, what is the potential other day that might be available for them to do the project? Or are there things that can be altered that can be moved inside? So we have had instances where we planned even something like a field day with a corporate group at a school, and we were able to move all of that indoors into their gymnasium with a fair amount of ease, things like that. But it really depends on the project itself, I would say. Is it something that can be done in the rain? If not, what kind of measures are needed to be taken to make that happen? And that can be tricky. I mean, that's kind of a case by case basis as far as my experience goes.
Makes sense.
I have a question. I'm curious, because some folks were asking in the chat about getting people to sign up. Did you feel like it's easier to get like the groups that have signed up as a group or as a team? It's easier to get those folks to show up versus hosting a large volunteer event where people are signing up one by one, or maybe like a mixture of like people signing up one by one or with teams.
Yeah, I mean, I can speak to that for sure. Corporate groups are definitely easier. I think there's a level of accountability for those, and especially if they're corporate groups, they're basically getting paid to come and not work their regular job anyway. So I think that's definitely easier as far as consistency goes, but I also think that there is something to be said about adding like a level of healthy competition to a project. So if you have people sign up as teams and give them names and all that stuff, and maybe incentivize them as far as like the winning team XYZ, something like that, that's worked pretty well for us too, as far as like school groups or just individual like family teams, those kinds of things. But I also will say we run the Toys for Tots program in our county, and that project individuals show up for all the time. And I think there's a level, I mean, granted, Toys for Tots is a very big name, and it's around like the holiday time, and there's a lot of feel good vibes going, you know, associated with that day. But if you can tap into something that and it might even just be like the description or something like that, that you know, again, goes back to the communication of things, like how are you communicating that you know, people would want to attend it. And I think that's
I
that's
love that because I love really great names for things. So I feel like in some ways you think about Toys for Tots and you're like, well, that has like a sort of a certain ring to it. We have one of our most popular blog posts that we have on our blog is actually creative names for volunteer programs. And you can use those for volunteer events too. And sometimes if you have a really catchy name for an event and a really great description, it's a lot easier to recruit for it because it has a certain like ring to it. And it's interesting to see how people gravitate towards those types of names. And, you know, Toys for Tots has been around for a long time, but you could name something new that has that same, you know, ring to it, and it could be around for a long time as well. So there's no reason why your event couldn't have that same potential, I feel.
And I would say if there's an aspect of not having enough people to sign up for something, tapping into your local, I mean, we as Pittsburgh Cares have affiliates all over the country, but and I'm not here to like sell that at all, like points of light affiliates, but any kind of volunteer center that is built to amplify the voices of nonprofits, I would say take advantage of that. If there's something that you can do to maybe even like do a social media takeover of another organization or something like that, where you're not just speaking to your regular audience, you're speaking to maybe a new audience of people. You know, there's no harm in asking someone to help spread the word about that.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that as far as like a benefit of an event, because like if you are hosting an event, it does take a lot of planning and it takes a lot of effort, you know, to pull together the resources, to supervise all of that. And so it is really an opportunity to sort of like, you know, really create and build some enthusiasm around your organization. And it's a chance to sort of tap into all kinds of partnerships and expose your organization to, you know, new groups of volunteers. And so I feel like you said something, Amanda, recently that was, you know, just about this idea of striking a balance, like where it's not only about the project or only about the fact that it's really this interesting sort of balance that you're trying to strike with these events. Did you want to speak to that? I'm not sure if I'm saying it correctly.
Yeah, what were we talking about that the balance between like getting the work done, but also sharing your mission of your organization. I think we had spoken a little bit about the whole quality over quantity component of a volunteer day. Is this sounding familiar? I just want to make sure you're making sense. But yeah, I think just you know, volunteers are awesome, and sometimes you get so hung up on accepting them, and you know, sometimes you're wondering like, oh, I'm taking all these volunteers on, like what's really the payoff? But you know, you have a prospective group of people that you can really show your organization to, and then they can bring more people on board. And you know, the ideal, I think, in a lot of nonprofit situations is turning them into donors or advocates for whatever cause you are championing. But I think that balance of, yes, getting the work done, but also there's so many other components to a volunteer day. It's, organizing, communicating your organization's mission, really showing people what you're all about, but also for the volunteers themselves. Like, there's a huge amount of benefit to volunteering with people in your community or even within your company. We're coming out of a really weird couple of years where people are working online and meeting on Zoom and they don't get to interact with people in person. And I think there's a huge benefit to all of that as well. And if you can tap into that and have people have a really positive experience at your organization, they're going to remember that and want to come back. And I think that's crucial to those days of service, is trying to make it enjoyable, but also getting work done and finding that sweet spot for sure.
I love that, finding the sweet spot for you and really determining. And we have, so don't worry about this slide. I know there's a lot of things on it. We've got bonus resources that we're going to email out to everyone on Monday, including the recording. And you're going to get a special planning worksheet that Amanda has provided from Pittsburgh Cares. That's going to be amazing project planning. And we've also prepared just a planning guide that's going to help maybe evaluate some of your current processes for days of service and maybe just help kind of highlight, maybe one little tweak here and there of what could help sort of hone in that sweet spot for you and your organization and where you're at, and whether that be your process, your planning, or your partnerships. Those are the kind of things that I keep hearing as we're talking, that those are the things that are most important. Like really having just a pre-plan, like what's my game plan? How do we do this? And I can't remember the other thing I said. The processes through which we do it, and then also the partnerships through which we're sort of carrying them out as well.
Yeah, I think you're hitting on a good part there that, Amanda, you started with, where it's kind of like you offer these services, but the part that I always kind of in my head, I'm like, it has to be sustainable. It has to be you offering a service that you've kind of blocked and tackled already, that you can do it this way. So I think, for the group, when we talk about, maybe the experience is not going to be fun, it's litter pickup, or maybe it's going to be something that gets rained out and you've just got a group that have to end up writing thank you cards or a personal letter to a participant. Like, it's not what they meant to do that day. But if you've got it blocked and tackled, where you've always got, a short video of a participant talking about what this program has meant to their lives. So you don't have to always have that live person if you can't get them, but you've got that powerful story. You've got that person from leadership at your organization that knows how to do that elevator pitch, where they're going to come in and talk about why this matters to them. And you've got an activity, whatever that activity is. But I know, Amanda, I was curious, I think I threw this out when we were talking before, but are there any questions or kind of like thought starters that you've used that you give people in the day of to kind of be pondering or talking about with each other? Because I love that idea of the team building. If I've never met Amanda and we're side by side doing a task, what's a question that the team building can ask so that employee group, that student group is getting to know each other, but also what's a question that we could be pondering together? Like, how would we address this challenge in our community? So when the group comes back together, you've got something to talk about. Hey, Amanda, what did you and Elizabeth think about when we thought about ideas for tackling this? So that they're thinking and talking about your cause, not just about, what's going to be for dinner that night. So yeah, that said, I wasn't sure if you've ever seen some really cool prompts, Amanda. I put you on the spot there, but
yeah, you did.
No. I did. Sorry, I'm going to call myself out on it. I did not prep you for that too well.
No, that's okay. I think, any kind of question that, ties into whatever the organization is about, I think can be really interesting and thought provoking, as far as like, have you ever experienced, this issue? Do you have any family members who have done XYZ or something along those lines? And I think it, or does anyone have a story about this cause that we're serving? I think that starts some pretty good conversations about that. Or, even just more lighthearted questions like, has anyone had like what is your theoretical worst worst experience with this or something, and everyone can kind of commiserate about that too. That's always a funny one. But not to, holiday volunteer projects, we always kind of do thematically, and we'll say, what's your favorite holiday movie? And then, everybody kind of chimes in on something like that. But yeah, I mean,
I love that, because I think it's just
I don't have any
intention.
specifics. I
Yeah,
guess I
but
could
it's
say,
the idea is intention. Like, we're going to intentionally have something they're thinking
Yeah.
about, intentionally have something they're talking about. I know we've talked about it in other webinars where, it lets you tap into a different part of a company because it's their HR team building budget instead of their nonprofit support budget, where maybe, the whole point isn't to have the executive director swoop in and do something really fast, or, I think someone was bringing up, they paid for a, big old machine to do what they had hoped that the volunteers would do for the full day. When those things
Right.
happen, if the objective is set prior that, no, we're not going fast, we want to see if any leaders step up. We want to see, like, out of our employee base, who does kind of start to organize each other. Because maybe in a project like this, where they're not on Zoom, we can see some potential we've never even seen in our employees before, to take on leadership roles, to be good team players, to help draw out new talents and skills. So I think just thinking outside the box there, that supervisor that you're talking to, that person who's the liaison from the company or group, do a little pre-planning, prep with them, and it may open up some doors and revenue that you didn't even think was there, because you can create an impact story that has a big value for them. I wanted to make sure, because I saw the bathroom porta potties note on this one, Court. The one thing I really stuck with me after the last call was Amanda's comment about having that, I think it was go box, not go bag, but I wanted you to tell the group, I thought this was just great practical advice. Like, what goes in that go box so that you're prepared for anything.
Yeah, so we've done enough projects that we have definitely developed the idea of a go box. And it's funny you mentioned porta potties, and we're not saying go to the porta potty, but rather just like a go bag. We've got pretty much anything that you might need, anything from a first aid kit to sunscreen, poison ivy wipes. And I think we included that on the planning sheet of what we typically include in something like that, to the point where we've actually included a roll of TP in our box, because we had an instance where none was provided in the porta potties that we rented for a site. So we now include that in our list. Duct tape, scissors, all those good things. But yeah, well, that's something that we always carry with us. We usually keep one even in our work truck with us, just so we have any of those absolutely necessary things that you might run into that you're like, oh shoot, I could really use a piece of duct tape right now. And you've got it, because you've got your go box.
Duct tape is always
number one tool. Yeah.
I would definitely say that for me, and in my experience of working in volunteerism in a nonprofit farm, there are about 6 weeks out of the year where we always have to have porta potties on site, because they get dropped off all different locations, because you're very spread out on the land, and that is sometimes one of the most challenging parts. And so for those events, like, we always have to have a leader that takes groups of volunteers off to where their site is. And once they go over there, they may not be able to get additional water. Like, so all of that needs to be transported. And that has to be something that those leaders of those groups, as they kind of go off onto their own projects, they have to really be like, okay, here's this, and this, and make sure they have all those boxes checked, but they also are responsible for being not only the supervisors, but also, creating engagement. And so I do like that, we were talking about what's a great question to ask. I think that that's something you can create too, with your volunteers, your volunteer groups, as far as like, what's our outline for this project? So the group comes in, like if it's a service learning group with schools, and then there's your, how can you marry those two ideas, and really think like, here's the project we're doing, here's the experience we're hoping to provide. And sometimes, depending upon the age group, I've worked with some pretty young volunteers doing, pretty, farm stuff, and scooping things and shoveling things. And so you have to make sure, we talked about this, Amanda, having enough shovels for everyone, not just one
Yeah,
shovel, a
for
group
sure.
of 10, because then there's a lot of standing around and that takes coordinating. But also like asking them to open their eyes and observe, what's going on around you, so that at the end of the day, like sometimes I'll say that with young volunteers, I'll be like, keep your eyes open and you tell me the most interesting thing you see today, and we'll talk about it at the end. Because there's a lot of animals and there's all kinds of things happening. And sometimes when you say fun things like that, like what's the most interesting thing, people keep their eyes open for interesting things. And so that's, they don't know what that means yet, and they'll figure it out. I'd be curious too about just maybe hearing about what it would be like, the difference between working with a corporate group versus like a service learning group or like student volunteers. How do you manage that?
Yeah, I think we definitely, oh, sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay, great. I thought I was talking and I couldn't be heard. I think having a discussion before, right before the planning phases start, as far as like what is the motivation behind the project day, is super important. But as far as approach goes, we actually recently just picked up a few high schools that wanted to do some service projects, and we've actually given them some pre-work as far as before they even get on site, to start thinking about the importance of whatever the mission of the organization is that we're going to. What are some things that you can learn about this organization before we go? And I think those communication parts at the beginning of the day too is even more important with a school group. And truly, I know it's called service learning for a reason, but truly educating them on, what your organization's about, what they're going to be doing. And honestly, don't assume that people are going to know how to do something. I think the more instruction you can provide, the better. I was just recently on a project where a student had never broken down a cardboard box before. And it struck me as something that like, I would never know that someone didn't know how to do that. And they were like, well, how do I do this? And I was like, oh, that's easy. This is how you do it. But just not assuming that someone's going to know how to do something. I would say the more instruction, the better. And that goes for corporate groups too. I know when we are faced with a large group of people, we've got a small team here. We usually hire some one-off project leaders essentially, or we deputize, like I was saying before, some other individuals to help lead tasks. But we also, if we're talking like a group of, I would say even 30 to 100 or more, we developed a task board where every sub project that we want done, each individual person's slot is essentially represented on a board that says like planting, and there's 4 cards in the planting slot. So you take one of those cards and claim it as your spot. And it just makes the day run really smoothly, as far as what is still available to be done and that kind of stuff. But then we also usually include some pointers for the day, so that either whether it's with corporate groups or youth groups or anyone, there is a set of basic instructions on there as far as what the expectations are that we want you to get done, especially if one of our staff members isn't available, or especially during the kickoff of a day, people are asking a million questions to 1 or 2 people. And if you can provide more answers on that card, the better. And so even like emergency points of contact, or even a map of the site, if it's a large site, all that kind of stuff goes on that task card that's on that board that is available to them. And that is actually a huge tool that I know I totally failed to mention the first time we chatted, but that's something for larger days that we definitely use, and it's come in handy for sure.
Your task board got a lot of thumbs up in the chat. That was
Cool.
that's when the rest of
That's
them
great.
like.
Yeah,
I saw
I love it.
I may steal your thunder, AK, but I keep seeing questions about like recruitment. Like, how do you do this? So I think it's a little bit of, even if event doesn't go as well as you had hoped, how do you do more? So I think that's going to be a nice one to kind of move into here. And I think Court, you moved us into it a little bit, but that idea of like, who did you get? You know, if you've got an older population coming, you know, make your next event where they bring a family with them, so that they're bringing in their grandchild or whoever it might be. If you've got students there, sending home something with them to invite their parents to bring them back for a family day. You know, thinking about what is the next step. I think, Amanda, you and I talked a little bit about this, where even with a company, you've got to have some easy next step levels of engagement, so that they have a nice take back to the office project to collect something or do something or send out pictures of it, so that you just have these like easy next steps, so that those people who take the easy next step can then be invited to take even a bigger step and a bigger step, so that you're following them in a journey of becoming more and more of an organized volunteer that wants to keep taking part in your things, rather than someone who came once and then gets asked to do something where you're like, whoa, that's too much. I can't do that. So I think that some of that too, I'd be curious just for that kind of afterwards, and maybe I'm getting off topic, Court, so we can go onto the screen if we need to, but just how you keep them moving through. You know, we've got liability waivers that you can do on, you know, volunteer management software like ours would Get Connected, or do it on paper. You've got your e-blast to try to back up what you're doing and invite them to the next thing. You liked this. I think you'd like this too, because you know they're good at that or they're passionate about it. But I really, what works so well that you found that they want afterwards? I'd really be curious about that for like the follow-ups.
Yeah. We typically take photos at all of our events. I think that's a huge and easy thing to do. If not you personally as the volunteer coordinator for that day, we've actually, other staff members have taken photos either on their phones or with a camera. We've even, you know, hired a photographer for some days of service, depending on the group. If it's a big old corporate group that maybe is a large funder of yours, I could definitely see that as justifiable. But we've also had volunteer photographers that have done fantastic jobs. So I would highly recommend tapping into even like your local retiree groups. I know, I mean, we personally run a retired volunteer program at Pittsburgh Cares as well. So we've got some pretty easy access to some retirees, but yeah, I mean, there are organizations, and I don't know if it's a national organization called Osher. It's like an elder learning group of people, I think, that do different classes over the age of, I think it's like 55 or 60. I can't remember. Carnegie Mellon and Pitt both offer groups for that here in Pittsburgh, but that's like an easy group to tap into. I know that they are always, at least in our neck of the woods, even looking for like guest presenters sometimes for the summer, especially. And so, you know, feel free to ask them if you can come in and speak about your organization and what you do, and talk about some of the volunteer opportunities that you have. But as far as getting back on track, that was kind of a sidebar of recognition. We've set up some pretty easy templates, and I think someone in the chat might have mentioned that too, as far as having a template ready to go that says, you know, that maybe includes a group photo. I've written handwritten notes and then just uploaded my handwriting to Canva, which is a really easy tool to use, and toss on just to add that personal aspect to a note. You can, you know, scan your handwriting and plop that note right in there, so it gives that hand touch, even though it's not a handwritten thank you, it still kind of is. And just thank people and include, you know, their photos from the day. If you have social media channels, include them on there. And then also, not to really push the task board, but on our task cards, usually, now that I'm thinking about it, if we have a hashtag for our region, just volunteer PGH. So we encourage people to even take photos themselves and use that hashtag. And then if we pick up anything that's tagged that day, we'll just retweet it or reshare it on our stories, things like that. So they're all tied together. But if that group or your project or your organization has a hashtag, we definitely encourage people to kind of stay in touch that way. And then people are sharing photos of of themselves and all that stuff. We've actually used the term service selfie, like hashtag service selfie too, where at the kickoff, if I'm at a kickoff of a project and this was probably pre-COVID, I carried around a selfie stick in my car like all the time. So I would take these selfies with big groups of people like a total dork, and it was very fun. But anyway, it works. I think there's no harm in being a goofball when it comes to doing good stuff. So that's kind of my jam. But yeah, I mean, following up, I think it's that trickle of thank you. Also, I think you'd like this. We've even implemented projects where, like I mentioned, we run a retired and senior volunteer program where we're doing bring your grandkids with you, especially during the summer. If there's people that want to spend time with their grandkids, they can serve together, and they're kind of working towards a common goal, but also getting to spend time with one another, which is really cute.
I
I
think the
think
other
hashtag service selfie might be the thing that made my week.
that was right here. I like
Great.
I want to say that that might be the highlight of my week. But I feel like a lot of what we're talking about too, especially when you think about like cycles of recruitment. We did a webinar a few months ago that was really all about the volunteer life cycle. And it's, there's these parts of volunteer management where we really need to move volunteers through this life cycle so that they're continuing to engage and re-engage and sign up. And then there's that process that they personally are going through internally. And so really figuring out how to speak to that because they're in an internal decision-making process, right? Well, we're like, come on, come back, so we have to figure out a way to speak to that. And I feel like thinking about that volunteer life cycle, which you can check out the recording of that on our website. AK can probably find our webinars page with the recordings. But then I also am thinking about how, a volunteer event has a cycle that's really, similar in the sense of, post-event follow-up with really great hashtag service selfie, appreciation, and then an invitation to learn more about other opportunities that might not be event-based, but might be shift-based, or an orientation to do a different type of service with your organization that might be interesting to them. Elizabeth, I felt like there was something else you were going to say as well.
Yeah, I was just going to say back to the very beginning when we were talking about a service offering, if you're coming to someone as this is our paid service package, if that's something that you're moving toward, then having that impact report that, just like Amanda said, we're going to put 3 photos in it. We're going to make sure we get 2 quotes from your staff and volunteers while they're out there that day, so that they're getting kind of this media kit delivered to them, and your team, your nonprofit team knows, I got to get 2 pictures, I get 2 quotes. I've got this set quote from my board member and this set quote from a participant. I've got my 2-minute, participant video that I'm going to incorporate into this. It is an embedded file, and it's just, everybody gets the same thing. I'm just going to switch out, and Canva has those templates. I'm going to switch out the 2 pictures, switch out the 2 quotes, and this is my deliverable at the end that they can put into their end of year report, that they can share with their board. So that company, that class, that university, that group, they have a takeaway that really is your brochure, but with their faces and their pieces. So I think, all of these calls to action and next steps that Amanda and Cord are landing on, you can incorporate them into that kit, as well as kind of trickle them out in follow-ups afterwards, where it's, a reminder of what they did last year, because you're sending that coordinator the picture of the day, being like, hey, we're getting ready to kick it off again. Wasn't that a funny face I made? You just have that moment of bringing them back around again, which I love.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you don't have to do all of these things on your next event, but because when I love information, I love learning, right? And you want to be able to kind of find a way to engage with some of these ideas as a repeatable process, like what Elizabeth is talking about. I'm just going to do this one thing, and then I'm going to do it again and do it again. But I would say from my experience, I might try and implement 1 or 2 new things for my next event and make sure I've really got them down pat before I continue to add layers of this volunteer cycle. What's one simple thing that I can do to make my next event go more smoothly? And because I want to do all the things, and I don't know if anyone else here tries to do all the things, and you realize at the end of the week maybe I shouldn't have tried to do all of that. But really just kind of finding what are the things that is within the scope of capability for me to add as a layer of just making it just a little bit easier to host these events, making these events just a little bit more successful for, our mission, getting the project done, and also the volunteer experience, like just a little tiny bit. And I feel like come back to this resource because you're going to have all of this. And as you continue to like work on that program of specifically these days of service, like every time you get something, that you feel like it's down pat, then, maybe add that next thing. Or maybe there's something that is like at an urgent level where you're like, we can't go through another event without this. We have to have a better system for waivers. It's just impossible, right? That's like something I would address more immediately. So that's just my 2 cents, because I don't know if anyone else is like me, where you kind of want to do all the things. So I guess we'll try and take these last like 10 minutes here. And this will be a little bit of what you can see in some of the planning resources that we're going to send to you on Monday. Just evaluating what is our current service day process. I think sometimes just being really, really clear about like, what is it, that is happening? And then you can find exactly where those, like, here's an urgent thing we need to address. Here's a little tweak, like implementing Amanda Truckey's service board, maybe is the best thing, that we could do to like make this day go more smoothly. Really also for you and your program, like just clearly defining what are the goals that you have for implementing these days of service, and how can you meet those goals, and then really figuring out how to cultivate process and tools, like Elizabeth was speaking about, to really streamline those service day events. So we'll be sending you resources to help support your process post webinar, and we'll send all of those to you on Monday. And just definitely want to take a couple of minutes to maybe speak to some of the questions before we drop off today. So maybe about 5 minutes of questions. AK, what do you have for our panel?
Yeah, let's say doing the chat is its own experience. It's so great just to see all the conversations and all the ideas that people have. I feel like there was a big thread that went through about networking, where it kind of branched off on some of our early slides about where to promote your opportunities and how to connect into groups within your community. I would like to kind of talk a little bit further about that if you guys have experience to share about where you've found success within connecting within your community, and also how those relationships cultivate into the next event as well as just going beyond that first one.
From a high level, I'll start just the pieces of state commission. Like there are state volunteer commission sites that are promoting for capacity building organizations like volunteer centers. So if you're a larger organization, starting state top down, and then I think, just like Amanda represents Pittsburgh Cares, there's a lot of local volunteer United Ways centers, groups, associations that you can reach out to so that you're part of their network. Our technology is really cool because you can post in one place and get it promoted through all those things. So if you're thinking about like how to have a volunteer management place, think of whatever you're using as your catcher's mitt. And then think about, how do I get an invitation to that one catcher's mitt? So it's always it's completely updated, but the Facebook page, the association link, the other aggregators that can get you exposure. I know we talked a little bit at the very beginning before the recording started of just, a company that's going to bring in everybody because they're headquartered in your area. So they might have a bigger body count coming in for one day of service, or those ideas of alternative spring breaks or family mission trips that are coming out to do a service week instead of just a week at the beach. All of those ideas are just threads to put out there, but lead them back to that one place, whether it's your volunteer management software or whether it's just your website, so that you don't have to update everything. But whenever you do, it's pulling back to that one place where everything lives. And then I'll kick it to you, Amanda. I'm sure you have lots of other ideas of where you've been able to kind of source out little additional feeders.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can't agree with you more about state service commissions and all of that good stuff. I would also add, kind of in that same vein, I'm an AmeriCorps alumna, and I think that's a huge pool of people. AmeriCorps has like a bajillion programs in every city, and those ages run the gamut. You can have people right out of college. There's a lot of older individuals that are looking looking for work and things like that. Or even, I know when I was in AmeriCorps, we even had, on top of our regular service placements, we had like AmeriCorps days of service. So we had to go out and find other projects for us to do and serve and things like that. But I do know that we have worked with schools that have different kind of community service hour requirements. There are quite a few like young professionals networks in our area that often service is an idea that they really want to incorporate into their networking opportunities, and all of that good stuff. And honestly, it's funny we're talking about this today because I was just at the gym the other day and my trainer was like, hey, we really want to do something service oriented. Do you guys have anything coming up? And I was like, you know what, why don't we do something like that? Because one, you could pick something really hard and the people at the gym would be like, yeah, I want to do this because they're all about like getting sweaty and gross anyway. So why not put them in a volunteer project?
I remember we talked about that, Amanda, where it's like when you have a group coming, don't think too small, because if that group is a construction background or a gym background, there may be something where you'll have a few members of that team that can take on something that you would have had to pay a lot of money to get fixed because they just have the
Yeah.
equipment in their back pocket because of the company they are. I think that's a great point to pull out. I know Ty, I think posed a question about that 20 to 50-year-old sweet spot. They're working, they're busy, they're great volunteers, and we can't get at them. So I don't know, off the top of my head, I would just say personally, I would say what's happened in 2020 has opened up volunteerism for me because I can virtually volunteer in ways that before people weren't set up to do that. So having an hour where I can be on a board or in a meeting or go do something on my screen where I couldn't have made it there in person and back before. Sometimes I think thinking outside the box of how to help a working individual have those moments to come in and do a career day or come in and do the things that they couldn't do before. I don't know, Amanda, if you've seen things that are just really good, asking them why does this time work for you, for the few that have actually made it, if there's others like them that you might be able to figure out what was it that made that a sweet spot. But yeah, anything that you're seeing so far for that age group?
Yeah, absolutely. I think kind of in the same vein of corporate groups and individuals that are working all of the time, I think we've seen success with like happy hour themed volunteer projects. We'll have like a slot for volunteer days that are maybe they start at 3 or 4 and then they wrap up at like a local brewery or something.
Mhm.
Honestly, it's a true happy hour post project, which has been really fun. But honestly, I mean, I think another thing, it might be a very obvious answer to most people, but like who's funding your organization and do they have like what is their employee volunteer policy? That's a very common thing nowadays for companies to have. They're giving their employees a day or two of paid time off to go do something. And from what we've seen in working with companies, not everyone utilizes that. So I would ask about that for anyone that's maybe providing you with funding that's a corporate foundation or a company sponsor, and see if there's anyone that would be interested, in coming to your organization during their workday. I think that's another pool of people that, the time they have the time. They might not have the time per se as far as they're working, but if they are busy during their workday and they get a paid day off and they're not using it, why not use it with you guys,
Yeah, we're seeing that VTO, volunteer time off, as a benefit, especially a lot of Gen Zers are requesting that as part of their compensation packages. They want to be compensated and they want to give back. And so for those younger groups, like that's kind of on the rise. We've got some information on our blog about that. So we're kind of coming here right at the 2 p.m. hour. I honestly can't tell you how much I love hanging out with volunteer leaders, and this has been amazing. I feel like we could talk all day, but I want to say thank you to our panel. Thank you to Amanda from Pittsburgh Cares for joining us. If you want to check out the cool stuff that Pittsburgh Cares is doing, you can head to pittsburghcares.org. And you can also see what their Get Connected volunteer site looks like at pittsburghcares.galaxydigital.com. AK is going to drop the link for you from Amanda's Pittsburgh Cares website to her worksheet, and we're also going to email all of that out. So thank you so much for your time and your presence today on the webinar. I'm going to get that recording for you and all the bonus resources. And I just want to let you know, if you're curious about Get Connected volunteer management software, we truly do have a solution and a tool for every organization, program size, and budget. Please head to info@galaxydigital.com. Send us an email if you're curious about what we're doing and you'd like to take a look at what those options are. And if you want to check out our new volunteer sign up tool, you can do so at volunteershift.com. If you have any questions at all, please feel free to reach out to us. We are here to work with volunteer leaders. We're here to help the helpers every day. So I'm just very grateful for your presence, and thank you all so very much. Did I forget anything?
I think good. Thank you, Amanda.
Thank you
Appreciate
so much for
being here
having
with
me.
us.
This
Yeah.
was
It was
great
a
to be
pleasure.
here. It's so nice chatting with you all.
I always feel like I need to have a copy of the chat because there were so many great ideas
I
flashing
know,
past on the
yeah.
right.
It
Where
was
I was
like,
like,
oh,
ooh,
there's like 47 missed messages.
Yeah.
What am I missing?
I know. We're going to have
'Cause
to
I'm
like,
usually the one, like checking the chats and stuff. So
Yeah,
we'll have to
thanks
pull
everybody
together
for being here.
resources for all of these questions. Just head to our blog at galaxydigital.com, because maybe we've got a resource for you. We've got a great search bar on there that you can just type in anything that you're looking for and pull up a resource. It's a blog specifically for volunteer leaders. So maybe if there's some unanswered questions that we didn't get to, perhaps we already have a resource for you.
Thanks,
But
everybody.
thank you so much, Amanda, and I'll talk to you all soon. And we'll see you next month. AK, if you want to drop the link for next month's webinar, May 25th, that'll be great. We've already got that coming up, and it's actually going to be focusing more on how we specifically build those partnerships, which I know came up a lot in today's conversation. So if you're able to join us for that one, we'll dive more deeply into that specific topic, but huge part of building these event days as well.
The chat's already signed up, so I think
Oh.
that's a good sign. A couple people already there. So,
Wonderful.
That's awesome.
all right.
That's great. That's amazing. Oh,
Thank
man.
you all.
All
Yeah,
right.
thanks everybody.
Enjoy your weekends. Bye.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday.
Yeah.